Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the new season. Would you believe already new season of the F1 circuits? The 2022 Formula One season is now here. We've had our first qualifying, and that is what we're going to look at in terms of the standings and for where we're going to be starting today. So this is a pre-race stream. I will be doing a live stream throughout the Bahrain Grand Prix. And I'll be doing that live on YouTube and Twitch and Twitter. For those who want to follow that, it will be a live timing screen, and I'll be watching the race as well, so I'll be able to comment on what's going on in the race. And it's an interesting lineup, and the reason why is because yesterday's qualifying threw up so many shocks. I could not believe what I was seeing. The McLarens were nowhere. The Mercedes were off the pace. Yet the Alfa Romeos and the Hasses, who had a terrible testing, shot up. And well, I mean, what more can I say really in that respect? Bottas and P6 and the Alfa Romeo. How on earth he had about what did he even do 100 laps throughout the two testings? So it's a very mixed grid. A very mixed grid. It'd be interesting to see with the new cars, the new designs that were designed specifically to allow closer racing. Now we're finally going to see whether or not that has actually made a difference. So let's have a look at the timings for yesterday. Let's probably should do that straight away. And there we are. So as you can see, we have got Leclerc obviously on pole with a time of 1:30.5 was his best time. And it's interesting. Now, what's interesting here is look at the gap between the fastest and the slowest. 1:33.6 by Nicholas Latifi down at the back of the grid, quite a bit off, and in all fairness, compared to Lance Stroll, just above him, 6 tenths behind him, all the way to 1:30.5. So basically, there's only 3 seconds. And actually, if you took Latifi out, it's only 2.5 seconds between the top and the very bottom, or the front and the very back. That's quite close. And when you consider back to previous times we've had rules change, that gap has often been 5, 6, 7 seconds. In fact, if you go back to the days of HRT and co, quite often they would fail to make the 10% rule. So this is quite a tight grid. That I will say it's a very tightly packed grid. If we just scroll down, as you can see on the thing there, Nicholas Latifi 1:33.6. Now, 1:30.5 is now we were expecting these cars to be slower. That I think everyone can agree on that these cars were due to be slower this season. Now let's have a look at but the best way we can compare, by the way, is looking at the previous seasons. So I've a look at last season's Formula One times at the Bahrain Grand Prix qualifying. That is the best scope we can get on in terms of who's where essentially. So if we look at last season, and as you can see there, Max Verstappen, who in Q3 got to 1:28.9, and he was 4 tenths quicker than Hamilton. So he was, I mean, that on a real push, best you can possibly do lap, he got 1:28.9, and yet the fastest here is 1:30.5. These cars are barely a second and a half slower than what they were last year at the front. Barely a second and a half. So they're slower, but they're not that much slower. And when we go back to the testing in Barcelona, we were seeing times of sort of 2 to 3 seconds slower than they were last year. They're slower, but only just slower. And actually, you could argue by the time the development, which is going to be quite a lot throughout the season, by the time that development gets further throughout the year, we may see actually that time gap between the last season and this season actually become less and less. So it's a really interesting timing, really interesting mix up on the grid. I'm not expecting the grids to stay much like that throughout the season. One thing you will see as well, though, throughout the season is some cars have got more scope for development than others. And so you're going to see a back and forth and swings and roundabouts and so on. For example, I don't expect the McLaren. You look at where the McLarens were in Barcelona and the testing there, and actually they were towards the front end of the grid, and then they went to Bahrain, and throughout the entire, not just yesterday in qualifying, but throughout testing as well, they were sort of nowhere near really the front end of the grid. So, and that's could be said for other teams as well. So it's but Bahrain has got this habit of throwing up more results that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see on a majority of other tracks. So I still would take Bahrain with a little bit of pinch of salt. I think the next couple of races will give us more of an idea when it comes to settling in and seeing what exactly or who is where. But the interesting thing, like I said here, again, if we go back to last season's qualifying and the timings. Now, last season, the slowest qualifying was 133.2. And this season, last season, the slowest qualifying is a 133.6, only 4 tenths slower. These are brand new cars with brand new rules, and the slowest car is only 3 tenths slower. And actually, it's only Latifi is the only car who is slower than the slowest time last year. That shows again that there isn't the cars are slower as we're expecting, but they are not as slow as we were expecting them to be. They're a lot quicker actually than a lot of people I think we expect them to be. And again, 130.5 to 133.6, only 3 seconds in it. It's a tight grid. It's a tightly packed grid. It's going to be really interesting to see how the race pace fares on these teams. So obviously to watch out for at the front, Leclerc and Verstappen, two young drivers, two young aggressive drivers. How will now? Obviously, we saw last season the battle between Hamilton and Verstappen, and it came to a head. And you know we all have our opinions on whether or not Verstappen legitimately should be crowned world champion and whatnot. But it'll be interesting to see how Leclerc deals with that, because obviously Hamilton is quite a smooth driver. He tries to avoid the confrontation. He's aggressive, but he tries to avoid the confrontation. Verstappen is just to throw my car in there and whatever way. And if I crash, I crash, and if I don't, I don't. But if I'm crashing, then I'm taking both of us out. And it'll be interesting to see if Leclerc, what sort of mentality he goes. For example, with coming down the front end of the grid, Leclerc has the inside line and Verstappen tries to squeeze him out. How is Leclerc going to back off, or is he going to be equally as aggressive? Are we going to see confrontations, etc.? Obviously, Sainz and Perez as well. Sainz right behind Verstappen. That will cause so Verstappen is obviously going to be looking to try and take Leclerc on, but he has to be mindful that there's another very quick Ferrari engine or Ferrari powered car right behind him. So that is going to throw up some things, and then Hamilton appears to be. You sort of got a fall here, and then it drops off. Surprise again for me yesterday was George Russell 132.2. Hamilton in the same car 131.2. So it's a second slower, George Russell. But I do wonder whether Mercedes have played a strategy game here. Did Mercedes hold George Russell back to play a longer race strategy game? Are we going to see George Russell actually better in the race if they set that car up knowing that they can't compete in qualifying, but they need the race pace instead? If they play different strategies between Hamilton and Russell, that I would, because their second's quite a big gap, and I don't think George Russell's a second slower than Hamilton. So that suggests to me they may be playing, some different tactics or some different strategies in that respect. If we scroll down the grid, Daniel Ricciardo 132.9 in the again, he's 9 tenths of Lando Norris. To be fair for Daniel Ricciardo, obviously having COVID, he's missed a lot of testing. And so he's going to have to do a little bit to get used to that car. But McLaren has struggled around Bahrain the entire time they've been there. Bear in mind, they've been there a couple of weeks now, been there for the practice, for test, for qualifying, and they were there obviously for testing a week ago. And they haven't really done too much since they've been in Bahrain. It looks much better, much more comfortable in a layout, more suitable like Barcelona was. And again, Bahrain is a little bit unique. It does throw up every year. You know, you can have 5 or 6 races going into Bahrain, and then you get to Bahrain, and the results can all be completely different to what they were in the previous 5 or 6. So I do think it will take a couple of races to get a more sort of a settle down, so to speak. And also I think as well, in terms of parts and upgrades, I do think other cars have got more scope for development than others. Other notable things, like I said, where on earth did Valtteri Bottas get his pace from? And that Alfa Romeo has been nothing short of useless through testing, and somehow it's stuck itself up there. 131.5. It's only 3 tenths off Lewis Hamilton, for God's sakes. I mean, this is where Bahrain can throw these sort of things up. Mick Schumacher in the Haas, what is going on there? And Magnussen in the Haas, seventh. And the Haas has outqualified a Mercedes and George Russell. This is what I mean. This is where I'm saying about how these shocks have just thrown up out of nowhere. So, and the Aston Martin. So, a lot of people looked at their cars and thought, oh, I like the look of the Aston Martin's car. And it's absolutely nowhere. Neither car made it out of Q1. So, it's a shock to the system. I think that it's not the qualifying that a lot of people I think were expecting. I certainly wasn't expecting that. Going to across to there. So again, I will be live throughout the race. So it's now in the UK. It's just gone 10 to 12. I will be back a few minutes before the race, and I'll be doing a live timing, a live stream with the timings. I'll also be watching the race as well. We'll be able to discuss it. You lot can have your say as well on the race, and it'll be interesting to see. And I think the first 10 laps will give us a real good indication of how this race may go. Are some teams going to show more race pace than what they were in qualifying? I'm looking at George Russell, a second off Lewis Hamilton, and thinking Mercedes may be playing a long-term strategy there. I don't think they set George Russell out there to get a good qualifying result. I think they've sacrificed the fact that they're not going to do that well in qualifying to set up the car more for a race. So we'll see. And also we'll see how well each car does in terms of its overtaking with the new rules. That is another thing to look out for. So I'll be back I'll be back a few minutes before the race, and we'll watch the race and we'll do the live timings, and I'll talk you through it, and it'll be interesting. I think it'll be an interesting race. So I'll see you in I guess in an hour or two before the race, and we'll see how we get on. Until then, take care all, and I'll see you at the start of the 2022 Bahrain Grand Prix.